Hi everyone, my name is Lucy. Welcome back to my channel. The video that you're about to watch is an essay on the characters Moose Mason and Midge Klump from the Archie Comics series. This essay, like all the others of the series, analyzes how Moose and Midge should have been portrayed in Riverdale. But what you might not know is that this video was filmed 3 years ago, in 2022, when Riverdale was still on. While I had stopped watching at that point, there might be some things that I say in this video that might not make sense in the context of now, as Riverdale has been over for a few years at this point. Thank you so much for understanding, and I hope that you enjoy it. The lighting in this video might not be the best, because this is all natural light and the sun is not out today, so just gonna make do with what we have. Hello everyone, my name is Lucy. Welcome back to my channel, and in case you didn't know, this character essay is part of a series of character essays on the Archie Comics characters and how them and their relationships with others should be portrayed in Riverdale that would help dimensionalize them better while staying truer to the comics. I already have gotten through all of the main characters in the Archie comics and by extension Riverdale. So now we are going to be moving on to the veteran characters of the comics that totally got the shaft in the show for some reason. And today in the hot seat we have the joint essay of Moose Mason and Midge Klump. Let's get started. Marmaduke Moose Mason, often referred to as Big Moose, made his first appearance in Jughead #1 in 1949. He attends Riverdale High School, where he is typically depicted as the best athlete but the poorest student. To make him slightly more than a simple meathead with no brains trope, his difficulties in school were later attributed to dyslexia. Moose is a large fellow with a muscular build and blonde hair. In early stories, he wears his hair in a crew cut. The more modern version of him sports a shaggier hairstyle. Moose is blessed with great strength. There's one sequence where he slides under a car and actually lifts the car up. As a result, people often have high expectations of him regarding athletics. He has helped Riverdale High School win many matches in basketball, baseball, football, ice hockey, and various other sports, though he seems to have a preference to football. Now, like I said, Moose was originally created as the literal personification of the jock stereotype, all brawn, no brains. In earlier days, whenever Moose talked, he would start off with a duh, decades before it became a colloquialism indicating something was so obvious that everybody should already know it. When Moose says it, however, he's not being sarcastic. And side note, that's not just in earlier days either. I have many modern comics in my house that have Moose starting sentences like that. It is often said that he consistently scores straight Fs, which at one point he thought meant fantastic. A theme used in many stories based on the Riverdale High rules is that failing students are not allowed to participate in sports and extracurricular activities. However, Moose's friends, notably Dilton, never want to see him fail and are always willing to help him study. Moose has done better at school when he needs to and is able to understand complex subjects like algebra if people explain them to him enough, something which nearly drove Reggie Mantle crazy when he was Moose's math tutor. In the Spanish version of the comic, Moose is actually called Gorilón, or Big Gorilla. Moose's given name is Marmaduke Mason. Other names given for Moose throughout the early years were Francis Moose McGonagall, Merton Matkowski, and Moose McGee in his very first appearance. That's very common though, especially for these more minor characters. They don't really decide on their name until they're like a full-fledged character already. In some stories, one of the gang, usually Archie, asks for Moose help with a problem that can only be solved by means of strength or intimidating presence. In one story, Archie tracked down 2 thugs who were robbing Pop's chocolate shop using a description given by Jughead, and the thugs ended up beating up Archie until Moose showed up and he just effortlessly picked them up and took them to the police station. While Moose is easily angered and will threaten those who upset him, he is usually a very kind, loyal, and compassionate friend. He's always willing to help somebody in need, and he constantly protects his friends from bullies. He also cares for the well-being of animals and small children. In one story, 2 children vandalize a classroom at Riverdale High, and Moose takes the blame for them. Now, besides playing into the all brawn, no brains, meathead jock trope, The character of Moose is seemingly not that problematic just yet, but we will get to a more problematic aspect of him later when we talk about Midge. So, let's talk about Midge. Midge Klump was designed by Dan DeCarlo and bears an uncanny resemblance to the pinups he did for men's magazines just before he started working for Archie Comics. Midge was created to serve as Moose's girlfriend, simultaneously debuting in both Betty and Veronica #4 and Jughead #5 in 1951. A lovely young lady and a longtime friend of Betty and Veronica, Midge has a history of being both beautiful and deadly. Midge's kindness makes her approachable, but any boy that comes anywhere near her should prepare himself for pain. We'll get to that later. Now, like other characters, Midge evolves from a similar yet different character. Originally, Moose dated a blonde girl named Lottie Little, but she was quickly replaced by Midge. For many years, Midge had a more petite build than the other girls in the comics, sharpening the contrast between herself and Moose. In later stories, however, she is as tall as her friends, with only her short dark hair making her identifiable. It is revealed in a story from the late 1980s that her parents are getting a divorce. Originally, she blames herself, but Betty convinces her otherwise. It's implied that due to some counseling, the Klumps are resolving their issue, though whether or not their divorce is finalized is uncertain. Few of Midge's interests are mentioned in the comics. However, she's known to have athletic skills and plays on the Riverdale softball team in addition to being a cheerleader. Midge and her girlfriends enjoy activities together, such as shopping at the Riverdale Mall. In an episode of Archie's Weird Mysteries, Midge reveals that she wants to be a stunt woman. In the TV movie Archie to Riverdale and Back Again, she becomes a chiropractor and shares a practice with Moose. The comics, however, show no basis for an interest in either career. Now, in Riverdale, I believe that Midge is only in season 2, and I think I remember her being in kind of a relationship with Moose. I think it was maybe an open relationship, or he would rather have been with Kevin. I don't remember. However, we really didn't get to find out that much more about her. I would say that in the realm of Riverdale, when it comes to Moose and Midge, they really made Moose a lot more than he was in the comics, and they really made Midge a lot less. Concerning Midge, the only things I really remember her doing in season 2 is striking up some kind of deal with Reggie to get Jingle, being Moose's girlfriend, who he may have been cheating on with Kevin. I'm not sure about that. Again, it's been a really long time since I've seen the season. And her being the primary understudy for Carrie in the Carrie musical, which was when she died, unfortunately. This show, and they're just killing off of veteran comic characters and like them bringing in characters that they just made up out of the blue. It's just such a weird path to take. Like, Midge and Moose have been a part of the comics for almost as long as Betty, Veronica, Archie, Jughead, and Reggie, and certainly longer than Cheryl. And again, they just don't get the same respect as those characters. Now again, since Moose and Midge are minor characters in the comics, I would certainly want them to be more background characters in the show too. But background characters, all the same, still deserve good writing and respect from the show's creators. That said, I'm going to talk more about Midge and the role I would like her to play in the show instead in the friendships and love interest section. But for now, let's talk about the character that they actually did decide to flesh out for the show, Moose. Now, my opinion on Moose in the show is bound to cause some controversy, and I've talked about this before. I feel like in my Kevin video, I talked about it a little bit, but I wasn't a big fan of Moose's relationship with Kevin. I think it's certainly important to have different representations of different people in the LGBTQ plus community because, as we know, everyone's situation isn't the same, and there are people, unfortunately, who are unable to come out or afraid to come out because they know that their family won't accept them. And I guess they chose Moose for that role because he is so hypermasculine in the comics, and they probably wanted to defy or flesh out that stereotype a little bit. However, it doesn't at all align with how he is in the comics. And I know they did the same thing with Cheryl, but Moose has been in the comics for much longer and again is one of the only people to have one significant love interest. Cheryl, on the other hand, that story arc really worked for because throughout the span of the comics, she really didn't seem to fall deeply in love with any boy. She was certainly with a lot of boys, but her relationship with Archie was mostly to get under Betty and Veronica's skin, and her relationship with George was, I don't think, ever exclusive, at least not to the extent of Moose and Midge. And on top of all of this, Kevin actually already dates someone in the comics who is going through a similar situation. Devin. In the comics, they do a good job of showing the ups and downs of Kevin and Devin's relationship while it lasts, and I already talked about that I would want to see it in my Kevin video. You don't need me to tell you that Kevin and Moose are never a thing in the comics, and I'm not totally sure what's happening with him in the show right now. I haven't seen any of this past season, as some of you might know. I feel like he comes back at some point after the time jump and has a thing with either Fangs or with Kevin, or maybe both. I feel like in Riverdale they just bring back characters for the sake of bringing them back. There's really no rhyme or reason to it, and it's incredibly excessive and unjustified, which you don't want when you're writing a show. So in my hypothetical version of Riverdale, I would surely want both Moose and Midge to be very different, and we're gonna talk a little more about how in the friends and love interest sections. Now, since Moose and Midge are both incredibly jealous people, inarguably to a fault, it would make sense that Moose would have mostly friends that are boys and Midge would mostly have friends that are girls. First, we're going to talk about Moose's friendships. I believe that his closest friend in the show should parallel his closest friend in the comics, and that is Dilton. Now, despite his limited intelligence, Moose has a deeply sensitive side, which many people do not see. The first person he opens up to about this is Dilton Doily. Moose has a deep admiration of Dilton because of his intelligence. Moose calls him his little buddy and will go to any length to help the diminutive genius. That nickname, Little Buddy, is like Gilligan's Island. That's the skipper's nickname for Gilligan. I don't know if anyone has ever seen that show. It's old. But yeah, just a nice little reference there. When Moose feels discouraged by other people's opinions of him, Dilton is the first to stick up for him. Moose is also often tutored by Dilton to make sure his grades are good enough to stay on the football team, and in turn protects Dilton from bullies at school. In one story, while walking through the snow, Moose and Dilton discuss Moose's thoughts and feelings. At this point, Dilton finds that despite what others think of him, Moose has a very profound and philosophical view of certain things. I think this would be such a fun friendship in the show if Moose and Dilton were friends. Now again, since it is a bit of a background friendship, I don't think any of it would really have to change that much. I think it would be cool if Dilton, if he ever got like picked on or bullied, that Moose would be kind of his bodyguard, and in turn Dilton would help Moose whenever he's struggling with school. I feel like Dilton would also help Archie too, because we all know that Archie isn't the greatest at school. They would just have to find a balance of Dilton being genuinely interested in Moose and how he thinks and how he carries himself, but not make it seem like Dilton sees him as just a case study. But I think they could do it, and I think that Moose and Dilton's friendship would be iconic. And if there was ever a Halloween episode where all the characters dress up, seeing Moose and Dilton dress up as Gilligan and the Skipper would literally make my life. Another friendship I think Moose would definitely have would be with Chuck Clayton. Now, I've said this a couple of times, but Chuck, Moose, and Reggie are almost always considered to be better athletes at Riverdale High than Archie. So I think that Moose and Chuck would definitely have a mutual respect for one another, and since they excel at most of the same sports, they would get along very well and be good friends. Chuck is also an artist and cartoonist, so I could see, like, in one of the episodes him doing caricature art of everybody, and he does a caricature drawing of Moose, and I could see Moose just freaking out because he loves it so much. And then of course there would also be other characters like Veronica going like, "That's not how I look!" Now, since the comics are literally called Archie and Friends, of course, Moose should also have a friendship with Archie. Archie would be a very loyal friend to Moose, just like he's a very loyal friend to everyone, and they would probably mostly spend time together through athletics. Also, in the comics, Midge is one of the only girls that Archie never shows any interest in, and I think that Moose would trust him to actually spend time with Midge and talk to Midge, unlike most of the other boys in the school. Now, we've talked about Chuck, we've talked about Archie, but what about the other star athlete of Riverdale? No, guys, Moose can't stand Reggie, but we'll talk about that a little later. Now let's move on to Midge's friendships. Her closest friends are Betty Cooper and Veronica Lodge. Other girls she's friends with include Nancy Woods and Ethel Muggs. Her friendship with them is much more stable than with the boys, though Veronica's constant bragging gets on her nerves. Now, I actually think that Midge's closest friend in the show and in the comics, honestly, should be Nancy. In the comics, Nancy and Midge are always spending time together. They kind of serve as the straight men or straight women to more unstable characters like Betty and Veronica. Like, I remember this one story where Betty and Veronica and Midge and Nancy were going to all of these different winter sporting places like skiing and ice skating and snowmobiling and stuff like that. And Betty was really good at all the winter sports and Veronica was really bad. And she was getting a lot of attention from boys to say, "Oh, let me help you up," or "Let me help you, like I could give you lessons because you're clearly not very good at this." And Midge and Nancy are kind of observing through the whole thing throughout the story, and they say, "Well, Betty may be really good at winter sports, but Veronica's really good at picking up guys because she's really bad at winter sports." There's just a lot of events in the comics to them reacting to things like that and talking about it. And just because they are really the only two girls in the comics with one singular boyfriend, I always thought that that made them relate to each other and therefore gravitate towards each other. But in the show, I would definitely want them to have the same tightly knit friendship. They would be supportive of each other, maybe rant about their boyfriends to each other, and react to all of the weird antics of the more unstable characters. One of those more unstable characters that I could see them reacting to is Ethel Muggs. I think it would definitely make sense for Midge and Nancy to have a bit of a friendship with Ethel. They would not be as close to her because Ethel is a little nuts, but I think a friendship with Midge and Nancy would bring out Ethel's saner, more healthy side. And I think she might be able to do that for them too. And finally, Midge, of course, should be friends with Betty and Veronica. And again, Midge's friendship with Betty and Veronica is definitely more in the background than Betty and Veronica's friendship with each other or with Jughead or with anybody else. So I really wouldn't see any reason to change their friendship at all. Like, there's already really no jealousy there or anything like that. So just, you know, the same unproblematic friendship that she has with them in the comics would suffice. Now, this relationship, I just want to say from the very beginning, is not the healthiest. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about what I want from them in the show after I give a background of how they are in the comics. Moose is extremely possessive of Midge Klump, his steady girlfriend, and has time and time again flattened anybody who seeks her affection, Reggie Mantle being his most frequent victim. This possessiveness at times is taken to extremes. He's wary of any male even speaking to her and has at times assaulted even his best friends, inflicting injuries that should, by all rights, be life-altering. There are times when Midge can't stand Moose's jealousy and ends up scolding him, but every time he just wants to give Midge some space, she decides that she prefers the old Moose. He has threatened Archie before for various things, but since he knows that Archie's not anywhere near interested in Midge as a girlfriend, this allows Moose to be more tolerant of Archie. At one time, a computer matched Archie and Midge to Moose's fury, but they both stated bluntly that they had no interest in each other except as friends, which allowed Moose to cool off. Archie is the type of person who, if he was interested in Midge, he would have the courtesy to ask Moose if it were okay. Reggie, on the other hand, will stoop to dating her on the sly, which often results in Moose pounding up Reggie. This is a common running gag throughout the comics. Moose has a mean streak in many comics and spends a lot of time hiding behind park benches inhabited by Midge. He does this so that whenever somebody comes along to talk to her, he can jump out and beat them up. Often these are false alarms. Someone just happening to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, like I said, Midge's reactions to Moose's jealousy vary from story to story. She's occasionally annoyed by his violent jealousy and dislikes being avoided by all of Riverdale's boys because of it. However, because Moose's possessiveness over her, she has a taboo appeal to her that many of the Riverdale boys find irresistible. Despite her aggravation with Moose at times, whenever another girl shows interest in him, she reacts with the same jealousy. At other times, Midge purposely makes Moose Mason jealous by flirting with and dating other boys. Originally, she flirted with all of them equally, but by the late 1960s, Reggie Mantle was the most frequent. Midge usually inadvertently, though thoughtlessly, sets Reggie up to be beaten up by Moose when she flirts with him. In the Archie marries Betty storyline, which takes place in a possible future, Midge finally tires of Moose's jealousy and breaks up with him for good. She subsequently becomes close to Jughead, who owns the chocolate shop now, and they soon fall in love. Later in the story, we find out that they got married and Midge is pregnant with their first child. It's all very ironic, considering that Jughead was definitely not one of the boys that Moose was threatened by in their high school years. Although they seem like polar opposites, Moose and Midge remain deeply devoted to each other. Now, this is really the only reason why I didn't like Moose's relationship with Kevin. I didn't even mind him coming out as bisexual because, again, it really defies the hyper-masculine jock stereotype. But there was just something about him preferring Kevin to Midge that was incredibly off, looking at their entire history throughout the comics. And again, in the comics, Kevin already dates someone who's going through that situation. So it was just a strange choice, in my opinion, to switch out Devin with Moose. Again, we're basing my hypothetical version that I'm envisioning for all of these videos on the comics and what happens in the comics. So that said, I would want in the show for Moose to be interested in Midge and only Midge. His extreme possessiveness of Midge is obviously an incredibly dated quality, so if it did exist in the show, it would be very important to have Moose's and Midge's relationship to not be framed as aspirational, at least not in the beginning. And of course that goes both ways too, as we've also said that Midge is an extremely jealous person as well. I think especially in the earlier seasons, their relationship would be very up and down, and they would go through a series of breakups and makeups, and every time that they would be broken up or on a break, that Midge would entertain Reggie. And I already talked about this in my Reggie Mantle video, which is one of my favorites, so if you haven't seen that one yet, I will link it right up there. And Reggie, not really being the best person either, would act as Midge's side piece, so to speak, when she's broken up from Moose. Reggie and Midge would undoubtedly have a mutual attraction towards one another, but it would always be clear that Moose is the one that she's really devoted to. Again, this is a teen show, and in teen shows, there inevitably has to be relationship drama. And Midge is a character that I believe could really cause some, and some that could be really interesting and fun to watch. I think Moose and Midge, in that way, both have the potential to be very beautiful but deadly characters. The only difference is how they present that aggression. While Moose is more active-aggressive, Midge is more passive-aggressive. I think it's very important to show that any toxicity in their relationship, especially in those earlier seasons, goes both ways, and that it's not just one doing it to the other.
The level of toxicity
I would want Moose and Midge to have is actually unclear, so I want you to contribute on that. I want you to comment down below how healthy or unhealthy you want Midge and Moose's relationship to be in the show. Again, if it's unhealthy, it would be very important not to frame it as an aspirational thing, unlike, say, Ross and Rachel, whose toxic back and forth was supposed to be something that we were supposed to root for. But I'll be candid with this one. In my version of Riverdale, I really don't care if Moose and Midge end up together or not. If they do, they probably would have to go through some development regarding their jealousy issues. And if they don't, then they would still have to be each other's main love interests throughout the series. That's all I care about. In the span of the series, they would have to be together for a majority of it. What happens to them afterwards, I don't really care too much about. So I'm gonna ask you, what do you think that Moose and Midge's relationship should play out to be like? Should they be just super jealous and possessive of each other, and it would create a lot of fire, but it would not be framed as aspirational? Or would it be like that in the beginning, and they would go through character developments and character growth to allow them to actually be together in a healthy way? I want to hear what you guys think. So comment down below your thoughts, and also if you have any questions about Moose's character or Midge's character, feel free to comment that down below. I'll be more than happy to answer those. Obviously, I couldn't talk about every single story, every single friendship that either of them ever have, because again, they've both existed for quite a long time. So let me know your thoughts on this classic, yet somewhat dated, Archie Comics couple. Thank you ever so much for watching. If you like this video, please do not forget to like it and subscribe down below, and click the notification bell because I post really inconsistently and YouTube hates that. So if you click that bell, it helps me out. Thank you so much for watching again, and I hope that you have a wonderful, amazing day.